Next up, let's talk postseason with a guy who certainly has high level of credibility at Class 2A, 1A, 8-man, and 6-man, Kevin Shaffer, Colorado Preps Network. Kevin, I want to start with this where, it was a big announcement and it caught our attention to where with all that we had to deal with, with this off-season, regular season, and now pushing to the postseason, we found a one locale venue, and I think it's kind of exciting, especially the city in Pueblo. What do you think the strengths and maybe the flaws are that all classifications, including 2A, 1A, 6-man, 8-man, are going to play at the ThunderBowl in Pueblo?
Personally, I like it. I've always wondered why we don't play all our state championship games at neutral sites. And over the past several years, 2A, 1A on down, 8-man and 6-man have kind of stayed with their high school home sites for the championship. 2A, I believe, last year moved to a neutral site as well at Pueblo. And I get their arguments, but I like the idea of converging everybody together because we don't get the chance to do that in Colorado because of the staggered finish, Marty, where 6-man finish one weekend, then 1A, 2A, and then we wrap up the final week with 3A, 4A, 5A. So we spread out championship weekend really over 3 weeks. Now, this has been a weird year, obviously, from the start, from the late start. So I think it's the one positive that's come out of this is that for at least this year, we get to get everybody together over a 3-day period there in Pueblo and crown 7 state champs. And personally, I like it. But as you know, that's not going to be a unanimous decision. There's a lot of people, Marty, that would prefer to keep the smaller schools at the home sites. And I get that to a point from an economic standpoint. That's a factor from field regulations, sizes. I think that's a concern. People are wondering, how are we going to put a 6-man field on CSU Pueblo there? And then there's concerns about playing those 2 games on a Thursday afternoon and evening, and our parents going to be able to attend because of their work schedule, and they're not in the limelight. So I get all of that, and I agree with some of it, but I think for this year, Marty, I think it's a good thing that we're going to finish together.
So let's talk about the brackets, beginning with Class 2A. One matchup. You've got the top seed in Resurrection Christian against Moffat County. What are your reactions to seeing what that looks like?
Yeah, Res Christian obviously a favorite to win the whole championship because they've gone through the regular season, Marty. Their defense hasn't allowed a point, so
mind-blowing.
Yeah, I don't care if it's a 6-game season, a 2-game season, or a 12-game season. That's an incredible number, and they have one of the better defensive players statewide in Tanner Appleby. You look up his numbers, they're quite impressive, and I'm not sure if he's got there yet. If not, he's real close to the all-time sack numbers in Colorado history, so he's a tremendous talent, and they've got a lot of weapons on offense as well. Moffat County's a good story because they kind of came out of nowhere. They opened up, had to pick up a game because their opening game was canceled, and they played 1A Meeker, kind of a neighboring town, and they got thrashed. I mean, it was 36-14 if memory serves me right, and you kind of put them off to the side and said, well, it's not their year. They haven't lost since. I mean, they beat Woodland Park with a touchdown in the final 30 seconds of the game. They made a big sack to secure a win against Delta in their final game of the year, and so this is a team that's on the rise and playing well at the right time. Whether or not it's good enough right now to beat Res Christian is yet to be seen, but you think Res will move forward in this one, but Moffat's a good story.
What do you think of the 4-5 matchup? There's Eaton Reds. I mean, they're just so good at sports, no matter what it is. And then I have some familiarity with Pagosa Springs. We just did the interview with Mitch Lewis. And watching the film, when I put the piece together, Pagosa's kind of a physical, nasty squad with some talent. That should be a fun one, a 4-5.
Yeah, because Eaton is kind of nasty up front too, and they've got some weapons to run the football. So this one may be one in the trenches. And Eaton's coming off a tough loss. They led Platte Valley 14-0 early, and then lost a shootout 41-38. Had they won that game, they're at home this week. Instead, they've got to make that long trip down to Pagosa Springs. And you mentioned the offensive line. That's the one thing I've heard from opposing coaches that have played Pagosa is those 5, 6, 7 guys up front. That's one of the better groups in the state, and you're going to have to be physical with them and stop their running game to have a chance, because if you don't, your offense, no matter how good it is, may not get many opportunities. So that's a very good matchup in round one.
Sterling Lamar catches your attention because there's one of those matchups where, you just want to go through the history books, right? Those are, programs with just great historical identity. Sterling's undefeated, and then the Lamar Savages come in with one loss. What do you think of that one?
Yeah, it's a good matchup, and we could see a lot of points in this one because Lamar, they have a good quarterback in Zane Rankin. He's a little lefty. He's a state wrestling champ, so he's tough and can run all over the place, and they've got a good wide receiver in the Buxton kid. I'm just concerned if their defense can play with Sterling, because where the Tigers are such a tough matchup is the wide receiver group. They've got about three of them. A couple of them are pretty lanky, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", that are tough matchups. And they're not just tough matchups. They can go get the ball, and they got great hands, and then they can move it when they catch it. So they're tough, and that's what Lamar's got to defend this week is play with the guys outside and then get some pressure on their quarterback. So Sterling has to be the favorite. They're the defending champs, but this could be a good game as well. I think all of 2A is a pretty good bracket, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm thinking, look at Delta's a 5 seed, or pardon me, Delta is a 6 seed. But, they've had some good success recently, and they're back, and they're going to play a 3rd seed in Platte Valley.
Yeah, and that's a good matchup. The one concern for Delta is they're going to go into the playoffs with a backup quarterback, Nolan Bynum, who was a starter since his sophomore year. He suffered a knee injury in a game against Inglewood, I believe, and he didn't play against Moffett County, and that was probably a big difference in that road loss. So they go in a little bit wounded, but there's a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side, from the group that made it to the state finals a year ago. So they'll be a tough out. But Platte Valley, great tradition there with Troy Hoffman. They've got a very good quarterback in Cade McDaniel. He does a lot in their spread offense. They put 3-4 wide, and he can run it and throw it. And he had a huge game against Eaton and their come from behind wins. So I think Platte Valley wants another shot at Sterling, and they could match up with the semifinals. But they've got to focus on a good physical team from Delta first.
Yeah, I love it when teams have targets between each other. But again, you got to take care of your one step.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
If we move down to Class 1A, you just mentioned the word tradition. Lyman Badgers pop off the page. They're a 1 seed. Holyoke gets them. I was wondering, with Lyman only playing 4 games, do you think that has any impact in that 1 versus 8?
I don't think so. We talked about it on the other report about Dakota Ridge, where they haven't been tested, but all their guys were involved in last year's run. That's the case with the Badgers. They were sophomore and junior dominated a year ago when they won their 2nd consecutive state title. So all those kids are back. They got a good list of returnees back. So they're battle tested, and they'll come into the playoffs fresh. And this is another interesting matchup because they were supposed to play a couple of weeks ago, in the final game of the regular season, and Lyman had to bow out because of their back half of quarantine. So this is a good matchup. Lyman likes to run the football. They've got 2 backs that last year each ran for 1,000 yards, and Corey Taha is a returning player of the year. Jeremiah Leeper, any team would take him as their number 1 option. And then you go to the other side, Holyoke's got a tremendous quarterback in Miles Sprague. He's been a starter since his freshman year. Around him, the talent is very young at the skill position, so how well they step up in a big game may be determining on whether this is a close game or possibly a blowout. But Lyman is the favorite, Marty, to win it again in Class 1A.
Ray is a 4 seed at 5-1. Hotchkiss ran the table, and what I like about this one, this is what you can get in Class 1A. How about that for opposite ends of the box state for those 2 teams to be matched up in the first round quarterfinals?
Yeah, and this could have easily gone the other way as far as the seeds, where Hotchkiss playing at home and Ray on the road. And some people will say that should have been the case because Hotchkiss is undefeated and Ray has the 1 loss. But that's an asterisk because Ray's loss was to Platte Valley out of 2A, who's the number 3 seed there. And again, that was a pickup game, if you will, because Ray lost a contest with Lyman, and they could have sat down and said, we'll just take the no contest to move on. They looked around and they scheduled Platte Valley, one of the best programs in 2A. They were down 34-6 in the first half and came back and twice made it an 8-point game in the second half. So they played well in that game, and they've got a tremendous quarterback in Tyler Collins, and he's a large share of their offense, and he will be the focus. And Hotchkiss's strategy, Marty, will be to run the football. They've got a good tailback and a good quarterback and a good offensive line, and their goal is to run the football. You said ran the table. That's what they want to do. They want to run the football and have Tyler Collins of Ray set on the sideline or play defense most of the game.
What are some bullet points about Meeker on the road against Strasburg? Strasburg's undefeated.
Yeah, Strasburg is another team that has not given up a point this year. They've gone through 6 games without allowing the other team to dent the scoreboard, and their schedule is a major reason why they haven't been tested. I mean, they to be honest with you, and they'll tell you, have played the most or one of the weakest schedules in the state. Not by design. They were placed in that conference. They were given the schedule this year, and so it's not their problem or not their fault. But this is a team that's been to 4 consecutive state championship games. They won back-to-back titles in 16 and 17, lost to Lyman each of the last 2 years. And their group is veteran. Colin Russell's a good quarterback. Tristan Graff, a very good running back. Both have been starters since their sophomore year. Meeker has a tremendous quarterback in Ryan Phelan. He probably would have been over 8,000 yards for his career had we played a full season this year. And he's got some good weapons as well in Turner and Woodward. And so this is a chance to be a very good football game, even though it's a 2 versus a 7.
The only football game in the Class 1A quarterfinals that has 2 teams that have yet to take an L, that's Centauri and Florence.
Good matchup here. Florence is got a great running back in Owen Bassetti. He's fresh because they've blown everybody out, and he hasn't had to carry the workload. They've also got a good quarterback, and I apologize, his name escapes me, but they're kind of a 2-prong attack on the ground. Centauri, not overly big, but they've crushed everybody. And they probably could have posted zeros on the scoreboard all 6 games if they wanted to as well. They've got a tremendous tailback in Mason Clonch, and they've got weapons all over the field as well. This has a chance to be a very good football team, and I also think it's 2 teams wanting some respect. Everybody in 1A talks Lyman and Strasburg. That's the story the last 4 years. These guys want to say, let's talk Florence or let's talk Centauri, and the winner obviously will get a chance to continue on. But it should be a very good football game.
Well, it is 2020, and we've had all sorts of weird things happen, right? So if you want some, well, here's your chance. Raise your hand. Go get some, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
How about in 8-man? As we go down some of the matchups, and I'll kind of rattle them off, and you tell me what kind of are cool storylines that, as we learn here, maybe we should steer our attention. You got Sedgwick County and Crowley County, and then Dove Creek Rangeley, and then Sanford and Mancos, Fowler and Marino. If you just kind of bullet point again some more details about those, get us interested, get us hyped up for these games.
Well, it's Sedgwick County is the storyline in 8-man, Marty, because they've won 5 consecutive state championships. They're the first team in 8-man to ever do that. I believe 3 teams had won 4 in a row prior to them getting 5. So that's a new record in 8-man. But if they win the championship this year, obviously it's 6 in a row. And that ties a state record held by, I believe, Lyman and Valor Christian, 2 tradition-rich programs. So, you're marching in history. And I think coaches would agree it's going to take an off day for Sedgwick County, or again, a ton of turnovers or mistakes or drop balls deep in their own territory for other teams to play with them, because over the past 5 years, they haven't been pushed very hard. And Crowley County, it's a good story. This is their first year in 8-man, Marty, and they've been a factor in the 1A division for several years, and they barely got into the bracket. I know their coach was really worried, Brandon Rowe, whether or not they're going to get in, and they got in. So it's a good story, but their reward is a date with the 5-time champs. So they're really going to have to play well, but they've got a good tailback in Adam Schultz. But with Sedgwick, you got to survive the onslaught that's coming right out of the gate, because you can find yourself down 32-0 before you breathe, and then you're out of the game. The rest of the bracket is going to be very competitive. Sanford and Fowler, very good football teams. They're both unbeaten, both physical teams. Fowler's the defending runners-up, so and they've got a lot of talent back from that team. Marino is young, but they're always a tough out. So that's going to be a great matchup with Fowler, and very physical and on the ground most of the game. So who wins in the trenches there? Dove Creek is a good story. They're still pretty young. Rangeley kind of out of nowhere in the northwest corner. West Grand has kind of owned that conference. Rangeley stepped forward as this champion this year, and I think they'll play with a little chip on their shoulder because they are unbeaten. They thought they should host instead of having to go to Dove Creek, because there's no direct routes between Dove Creek and Rangeley, and so they would like to stay at home. So that'll be an interesting matchup. And then Sanford and Mancos, they were supposed to play a week ago. and Sanford couldn't play because of quarantine. And that would have been a big game in the Southern Peaks between two programs that have had great success. So now we get to see it here in the first round of the playoffs instead of week 6. And it'll be a tough physical matchup, and it's probably a toss-up.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. And again, when we go back to that 1 seed, as you immediately reacted, Sedgwick County, for you as a football fan, you get to choose, right? You know these stories. Either you want Goliath to go down, or you want a chance to witness some history that we're talking, over a century of football being played. Sedgwick County has an opportunity to etch themselves right in a nice spot there.
Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason I know that community was a loud voice behind wanting to play the 8-man games on their home field if they had a chance, because they wanted to celebrate potentially, obviously we're 3 weeks away, but they wanted to celebrate potentially a state record possibly on their home field. And I get that, but this is one of the best programs in the state. And going off memory, Marty, it might be 3 or 4 years since they've lost a game to an in-state opponent. They've rolled a lot of people in the playoffs, including, and so they're the team to beat. There's a gap, I think, between them and the rest of the field, but that's why you play.
Mm-hmm.
It can happen on a given day, and that's why you play.
Well, gotta win it. How about 6-man?
6-man's going to be fun this year because typically, Marty, we have 1 or 2 teams. Sometimes there's 3 that seem to be a clear-cut favorite to do well in the playoffs, and you'll be stunned if they don't meet in the championship game. This year, I think that number is about 5.5, maybe to 6. And I say 5.5 because Eads is that 6th team that, if they're healthy with Damon Barnes in the backfield, they can beat a lot of teams. When he's out, they're not the same team. And they played Cheyenne Wells. He got hurt early, and it turned into a blowout. So that's my half team. But Fleming's the defending champs. They've got a kid, Brady Kuntz, who's returned 4 kickoffs this year, 3 of them for touchdowns. He holds the all-time record for most kickoff returns for a touchdown. He's a delight in the open field, and they're a good team. But yet they've beaten Prairie by 3 and Grenada by 5 this year. So that shows the depth of the 6-man division this year. So I think it's going to be fun. Stratton Liberty, they probably had arguably the best player in 6-man in Jarrett Lichty. He got hurt midway through and is done probably for the year. So it'll be curious to see how they react. They're always a factor, but they've only been on the field, Marty, 3 times this year. They're 4-0, but 1 is a forfeit. So they haven't played in a while. So it gets back to, are they fresh or are they rusty? And so it'll be interesting to see there. And Cheyenne Wells, they have great tradition. They haven't won that championship of late, so they want to get there. And Grenada, you would love him. He's a fullback, a sophomore kid. He's a John Madden type of guy, and he's a load to tackle on the 6-man division. And it's just going to be fun, Marty. Don't want to talk about individual matchups, but you've got really 5.5, 6 teams that I think have a chance to win 3 games in the next 3 weeks and raise that trophy. It'll be fun.
It is outstanding that these players and programs get the opportunity to make that final finish and complete a postseason to where they get some semblance of closure on a fall 2020, especially those seniors. Happy, healthy week of football ahead and throughout the course of the playoffs. Thank you. We appreciate that, Kevin.
Marty, it's been fun to talk football with you.
Always. Kevin Shaffer, Colorado Preps Network. Look and follow on coloradopreps.com and, of course, along all the social platforms.
We're here for the ones with big hearts, the ones with big calluses, the ones who go the distance, the ones holding down the fort, the weekend warriors, the crafty ones, these crafty ones too, and the ones just being themselves. Here's to the ones who define the Colorado spirit. We're proud to be the community bank that helps them live that way, because we're not just a bank in Colorado. We're Bank of Colorado. There's only one.